Welcome back. My name is Abby Phillip, and I'm here with you tonight. Appreciate everyone tuning in from wherever you're watching. We're broadcasting live from Los Angeles, Lumi to be exact, and meteorologists are predicting precipitation later this evening. The air here carries that distinct humidity you get before a storm rolls in. But if you think the weather's tense in California, consider what's unfolding right now in our nation's capital. A restricted congressional panel has finally gained clearance to examine the complete, unredacted documentation from the Epstein investigation. What they've discovered inside those pages has stunned even seasoned lawmakers. The current president's connections to this case run deeper and appear more frequently than virtually anyone anticipated. So what's the White House strategy in response to these revelations? Deflection, classic misdirection. And the target this time? Our neighbors to the north. The administration has launched yet another unprovoked verbal assault on Canada. The latest salvo involves threats to shut down a nearly completed infrastructure project, a massive bridge linking Windsor, Ontario, with Detroit, Michigan. Here's what the president posted. As everyone knows, the country of Canada has treated the United States very unfairly for decades. That's news to most Americans. Canada has historically been one of our most reliable allies and trading partners. The relationship has been remarkably balanced and mutually beneficial. But according to this statement, we're supposed to believe otherwise. The message continues. Now, things are turning around, not fast. Then it takes a bizarre turn. He writes about this bridge construction, a joint infrastructure initiative between Ontario and Michigan. According to him, President Barack Hussein Obama, and yes, he made a point of including the middle name, perhaps as some kind of apology for recent inflammatory posts, stupidly gave them a waiver so they could get around the Buy American Act. The statement grows more detached from reality. Now, the Canadian government expects me as president to permit them to just take advantage of America. On top of everything else, Prime Minister Carney wants to make a deal with China, which will eat Canada alive. And here's where things veer into genuinely concerning territory. The first thing China will do is terminate all ice hockey being played in Canada and permanently eliminate the Stanley Cup. Read that again. Let it sink in. He's claiming that if Canada pursues trade agreements with China, the Chinese government will somehow ban hockey throughout Canada and abolish their most sacred sporting championship. This isn't political hyperbole. This isn't strategic positioning. This is a statement so divorced from geopolitical reality that it raises serious questions about the mental state of the person making it. We're witnessing what can only be described as a cognitive crisis unfolding in real time. How exactly would China enforce a hockey prohibition across Canadian territory? Would they confiscate every stick and puck? Would they deploy enforcement teams to arenas across Quebec, Ontario, and British Columbia? And more fundamentally, why? What possible strategic objective would this serve? Hockey is woven into Canadian national identity. It's their cultural cornerstone. The suggestion that any foreign power could or would attempt to eliminate it demonstrates either profound ignorance of international relations or something more troubling. The infrastructure project in question is the Gordie Howe International Bridge, named after the legendary Detroit Red Wings player who was born in Canada and became an icon on both sides of the border. Perhaps the solution here is simple. Just cross out Howe's name with a marker, scribble in Donald Trump, and watch the controversy evaporate overnight. That seems to be the pattern with this administration. Everything becomes acceptable once it bears the right name. But make no mistake about what's happening here. This entire spectacle, the manufactured outrage, the nonsensical claims, the attacks on an ally, serves one primary purpose: distraction, misdirection, keeping public attention anywhere except where it needs to be. Because while we're being told to worry about Canadian bridge construction and imaginary Chinese hockey bans, members of Congress are reading through millions of pages of documentation that paint a very different picture of where our concern should be focused. Representative Jamie Raskin, one of the lawmakers who has now reviewed the unredacted files, conducted a basic keyword search. What he found was staggering. According to his analysis, Donald Trump's name appears more than 1 million times throughout the documentation. Let that number register. 1 million references in a collection totaling roughly 3 million pages. That's a mention roughly every 3 pages throughout the entire archive. For context, Harry Potter himself doesn't get referenced that frequently across all 7 books in his series combined. The Department of Justice, facing mounting pressure from both chambers of Congress, has begun the process of removing redactions from certain names, prominent individuals whose identities had been concealed in previous releases. The reasoning behind those original redactions remains murky. No clear justification has been offered for why specific high-profile figures had their involvement shielded from public scrutiny. Among the newly revealed names sits an interesting case study in consequences and corporate liability. David McKillips served as chief executive of Chuck E. Cheese, the family entertainment center chain built around appealing to children. His name surfaced in the documents exactly once. The context of that single mention appears, by most accounts, relatively innocuous, nothing overtly incriminating in the reference itself. Yet McKillips resigned from his position almost immediately after his name became public. Consider the optics from a business perspective. Of all the companies whose leadership might be associated, however tangentially, with the Epstein investigation, which would find that connection most damaging? Option A, a home improvement retailer. Option B, a financial services institution. Option C, a wholesale warehouse club. Option D, a restaurant chain whose entire brand identity centers on being a safe, fun environment for young children, complete with an anthropomorphic mouse mascot. The answer is obvious. For Chuck E. Cheese, even the most innocent association with these files creates an impossible public relations scenario. McKillips understood this calculus and acted accordingly, stepping down despite appearing only once in millions of pages. Meanwhile, an individual mentioned 1 million times currently holds the highest office in the nation. The disparity is striking. Yesterday, I reported on Ghislaine Maxwell's apparent strategy, seeking a presidential pardon in exchange for providing testimony favorable to certain powerful figures. She made a virtual appearance before the House Oversight Committee, where she deployed the Fifth Amendment with remarkable consistency. The questioning was direct. Ms. Maxwell, were you a close friend and confidant of Jeffrey Epstein? Her response came in carefully rehearsed legal language. I would like to answer your question, but on the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer this question and any related questions. My habeas petition is pending in the Southern District of New York. I therefore invoke my right to silence under the Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Even Chuck E. Cheese himself couldn't escape the surreal nature of this moment. The beloved children's mascot has become inadvertently entangled in one of the most disturbing scandals in modern American history. Another figure whose name surfaces repeatedly throughout the documentation is Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. His mentions exceed 100. The timing of this revelation proved particularly awkward, as Lutnick had a previously scheduled appearance today before the Senate Appropriations Committee. The official topic was broadband funding deployment, a technical, relatively dry subject matter that typically generates minimal drama. But broadband deployment wasn't what senators wanted to discuss. They wanted answers about Lutnick's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, who happened to be his neighbor. More specifically, they wanted to address apparent discrepancies between Lutnick's previous public statements and what the documentary evidence now reveals. Last year, Lutnick made emphatic declarations about his relationship with Epstein. He claimed that he and his wife severed all contact with Epstein back in 2005. According to Lutnick's account, Epstein made an inappropriate remark that crossed a line, prompting the couple to make a firm decision. They would never again be in the same room as that disgusting person. He elaborated, "I was never in the room with him socially, for business, or even philanthropy. If that guy was there, I wasn't going because he's so gross." The language was unequivocal. The timeline was specific. The boundary, according to Lutnick, was absolute. Now we advance to today's hearing. Senator Chris Van Hollen came prepared, having thoroughly reviewed the newly unredacted files. He had questions about a particular email that told a very different story. Lutnick began with familiar denials. "I did not have any relationship with him. I barely had anything to do with that person." That phrase, "that person," always signals something. It's distancing language, an attempt to create psychological and verbal space between oneself and someone whose connection has become problematic. But in this case, that person was someone Lutnick had considerably more contact with than he previously admitted. Senator Van Hollen pressed forward, "Secretary Lutnick, I think you understand the root of concern here. It's the way you described very emphatically your first encounter with him in his apartment. You said you were disgusted, would never have any contact with him again. Did you in fact make a visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?" The question hung in the air, a straightforward yes or no query. But the answer that came back revealed a stunning contradiction to everything Lutnick had said previously. "I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies." Let's parse this admission carefully. Lutnick didn't just accidentally cross paths with Epstein at a restaurant or bump into him at a social function. He traveled by boat to Epstein's private island, a location already notorious, already associated with credible allegations of criminal behavior. And he didn't go alone. He brought his entire family, his wife, his 4 children, their nannies. What kind of father decides that a private island owned by a known sex offender represents an appropriate destination for a family outing? Even if we set aside all other considerations, the judgment displayed here is staggering. But that's not even the central issue. The fundamental problem is that Lutnick lied. He stated categorically that after 2005, he was never in the same room with Epstein again under any circumstances. Not socially, not for business, not for philanthropy, never. Yet here he admits not only being in the same room with Epstein, but sailing to his private island for a meal? That's not an accidental encounter. That requires planning, coordination, travel arrangements. You don't casually end up on someone's private island. Think about your own life. Have you ever sailed to anyone's private island for lunch? The answer for virtually everyone is no. And if by some extraordinary circumstance you had done so, you would remember it with crystal clarity. It's not the kind of experience that slips your mind. And if someone later asked you directly whether you'd done it, you wouldn't lie about it. Senator Van Hollen wasn't finished. He'd found another disturbing detail buried in the correspondence, and he wanted it addressed. There's also a reference to the fact that Epstein had expressed an interest in meeting your nanny. Pause on that for a moment. Jeffrey Epstein, whose entire criminal enterprise revolved around exploiting young women and girls, specifically requested to meet the nanny employed by the Lutnick family. Van Hollen's question cut directly to the point. Do you know whether the nanny that you had on that trip was the same nanny that Jeffrey Epstein expressed interest in meeting? Lutnick's response demonstrated either genuine ignorance or calculated evasion. "No, I have no idea about that whole thing. I mean, I don't recall it having anything to do with me, and I don't know that." He attempted to close with an obvious observation. "It's just, this guy was a convicted sex offender, and obviously not a great place for kids and nannies." That's possibly the most substantial understatement we've heard in this entire investigation. Epstein's Island wasn't merely not a great place for children and nannies, it was potentially one of the most dangerous locations imaginable for that specific demographic. The entire purpose of Epstein's operation centered on accessing and exploiting vulnerable young people. Howard Lutnick now finds himself facing bipartisan calls for resignation. Democrats want him out. But significantly, so do some Republicans. Representative Thomas Massie, known for occasionally breaking with party orthodoxy, has publicly demanded Lutnick step down from his position. There was a moment during this week's congressional proceedings that initially seemed encouraging. Representative Lisa McClain, a Republican from Michigan, delivered a fiery speech denouncing predators and criminals. Her words carried real passion and moral outrage. "I don't get it," she said. "I've got to share with you. I don't get it. These folks are monsters. They're criminals. They murder. They sexually assault young women, minors." Finally, it appeared, a Republican lawmaker willing to speak truth about the powerful men implicated in the Epstein files. Finally, someone from the party currently shielding the president was finding their courage. But then came the clarification. Who was Representative McClain actually talking about? Which monsters was she condemning? Which criminals was she demanding accountability for? Not the men documented in the Epstein investigation. She was talking about immigrants. Her full statement revealed the actual target of her fury: And you know what the Democrats want to do? Let's release them into your communities and let's celebrate the criminals. Let's villainize the ICE agents and celebrate the people who are raping your children. She likely meant raising your children, but the Freudian slip is revealing in its own way. Consider the psychological disconnect required to maintain this position. Members of Congress are screaming about immigrants being predators and criminals while simultaneously doing everything in their power to protect the actual documented predators and criminals whose names fill millions of pages of investigative files. They're defending the most powerful offenders while directing public rage toward the most vulnerable populations. On the very same day we learned that Donald Trump's name appears 1 million times in the Epstein documentation, we have elected officials ranting about immigrant danger. The cognitive dissonance is so profound, it almost suggests a pathological condition. Perhaps they've contracted something that impairs rational thought. Speaking of disease, measles has made a roaring comeback in America, thanks in large part to the anti-vaccine crusade led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who currently serves as the nation's top health official, despite having spent years convincing parents not to immunize their children. South Carolina alone now reports over 500 confirmed measles cases. The disease that we had effectively eliminated a quarter century ago is surging back because people listen to conspiracy theories instead of medical science. Even the nation's number 2 health official, presumably someone with at least basic scientific literacy, is now pleading with the public to reconsider. Take the vaccine, please, he urged. We have a solution for a problem. Not all illnesses are equally dangerous, and not all people equally susceptible to those illnesses, but measles is one you should get your vaccine for. This shouldn't be controversial. We're talking about a vaccine that completely eradicated measles from the United States by the year 2000. It works. It's safe. It's effective. The science is settled. Somewhere, Oprah Winfrey must be regretting her role in platforming the various television doctors who later went on to spread medical misinformation. If she had Thanos-level powers, she could snap her fingers and erase them from existence. Unfortunately, she doesn't, and we're left dealing with the consequences of giving medical charlatans national platforms. In lighter but equally bizarre news, the Winter Olympics are currently underway in Milan, Italy. A peculiar rumor has been circulating through the Olympic Village regarding male ski jumpers and their pursuit of aerodynamic advantages through unconventional means. According to reports, some competitors in the ski jumping discipline have been injecting hyaluronic acid directly into their genital region. The theory behind this practice holds that increasing the size of that particular anatomical area improves aerodynamics by expanding the fit of the competition suit, thereby creating additional air resistance that allows for longer jumps. Olympic officials are taking notice. One spokesperson addressed the allegations. Ski jumpers are now thinking about enlarging their genital areas by injecting hyaluronic acid. Again, the idea is it improves the dynamics and allows ski jumpers to go further. If anything was to come to the surface, we would look at anything if you know it is actually doping related. We don't do other means of enhancing performance. Then, after that official statement, came the inevitable addition. But I'll be Googling it as soon as I get back to my hotel. Questions abound. Does this actually work? How much enhancement are we talking about? The proposed mechanism suggests that a larger bulge creates more fabric tension in the jumpsuit, which in turn generates additional lift during flight. The most prominent anatomical feature I've observed at these Olympics so far isn't on any athlete, it's J.D. Vance. But in all seriousness, if someone is genuinely willing to inject hyaluronic acid into their penis in pursuit of Olympic gold, that demonstrates a level of commitment that deserves recognition. That's dedication to your sport. Back home in the United States, conservative media outlets continue their days-long meltdown over the Bad Bunny halftime show from last weekend's championship game. A Republican congresswoman from Missouri is now threatening to involve the Federal Communications Commission over alleged profanity that may or may not have been uttered during the performance. She's not entirely certain whether anything objectionable was said, but she's outraged nonetheless. The lyrics from what we have seen from Bad Bunny are very disturbing, she declared. And if it holds true that, I don't speak fluent Spanish, okay? I know how to ask where the bathroom is, but these lyrics, if it is true what was said on national television, we have a lot of questions. This could be much worse than the Janet Jackson wardrobe malfunction. Let's put it that way. Let's examine the logic here. She's upset because she didn't understand what Bad Bunny was saying. But now that translations have become available, she's upset because she does understand. The inconsistency is remarkable. If only humanity had developed some technology for translating between languages. If only we had tools that could decode Spanish into English so concerned lawmakers could determine what was actually said. But alas, we're stuck with this impenetrable mystery that can never be solved. The conservative media ecosystem has continued generating outrage about this halftime show for days now. What most viewers saw as simply music and dancing has sent certain commentators into extended fits of fury. The intensity of their reactions suggests they might require pharmaceutical intervention. One prominent host framed it this way: depression, anger, stupid bowl halftime show. That's the focus of tonight's angle. Symptoms continue, hallucinations, paranoia. As another commentator described it, you see all these foreigners speaking a foreign language with foreign flags, marching into the camera like a caravan. Involuntary muscle contractions have been reported. Some viewers complained, this is supposed to be a unifying event for the country, not for the Latinos. One particularly distressed individual noted, sometimes it feels like your whole vida has gone loca. Multiple voices emphasized the same grievance. Not one word of English, not one word of English, one word. If you're still screaming about the Bad Bunny halftime show days later, there may be hope for you yet. Consider xenophobia, prescription strength xenophobia. This fast-acting medication counteracts even your deepest, most irrational racist thoughts, getting you back to smiling and functioning normally again. With xenophobia, you'll find yourself saying things like, I love Bad Bunny, without even realizing the transformation that's occurred. Ask your Facebook friend, who thinks they know more than actual medical professionals, whether xenophobia is right for you. Xenophobia, if you see someone brown, will calm you down. Available at trumprx.gov. Welcome back. My name is Abby Phillip.